Welcome to our Materials Management online seminar. Today we are going to be presenting the purchasing section. So the first section of today's presentation is just going to be some of the routines within the purchasing desktop. And this afternoon we will be going over purchase requisitions. Before we get into any serious level detail, we'll take some time to highlight some of the broader objectives for today's presentation, and we'll also review key terms and their definitions. After doing so, we'll hop into the system and work through the various purchasing and requisitioning routines. The purchasing routines allow users to order stock and non-stock items for inventories in departments, and they also allow users to receive items on a purchase order, either in full or in part. In addition to the routines for ordering and receiving, a variety of standard reports are available, allowing users to track any purchase orders that have been entered and any items that have been received. As you can see, we've listed out some of our go-to reports on the screen for you. This would be our print purchase order detail, print receiving documents, and list POs created from inventory. From a purchasing perspective, we will cover a lot of information, but there are essentially four main topics. We'll discuss the process for creating POs using both a manual and an automated workflow. We'll review the process for receiving POs. I'll go over the various PO and order types, and we'll take a look at the PO inquiry screens. PO types and order types fall into the category of key terms, so we'll take a quick look at these. As you can see, there are 5 different PO types. Purchase is the default PO type, and it can be used to generate a PO that contains both department and inventory line items. If I wanted to dedicate all of the line items on a PO to a single inventory, I would enter an inventory type PO. In the event that I have to return an item to the vendor, either as an exchange or for credit, I would enter a return type PO. A capital PO would be entered to purchase capital asset items that will depreciate. And a service PO would be used to purchase services, for example, landscaping. Once you select your PO type, you'll need to define the order type, for which there are 3 options. A responsive regular will default into the routine and would be used for a one-time purchase of a unique set of line items and quantities. This order type would also be used for any return POs. If I wanted to make an agreement with a vendor to purchase a predetermined set of line items and quantities, but have those items and quantities delivered as needed, I would enter blanket as my order type. And if I wanted to make the last scenario a little more rigid by requiring the same amount of a good to be ordered at predefined cycles, I can enter standing as my order type. Let's now take a moment to talk about the different PO statuses. Knowing what each of them means can benefit you in the event that you have to do any troubleshooting. If a PO has a status of working, that means the PO has been created but has not yet been verified. POs with a status of open contain at least one line and have been verified. POs in a back order status have only been partially received. Once the PO has been received in full, the status will update to complete. If you cancel a PO that's in a working status, the status of the PO will change to canceled. And if you cancel a PO that's in an open status for which nothing has been received, the status of the PO will change to voided. Finally, if you cancel a PO that's in a back order status, the status of the PO will change to closed, and return POs will also show a status of closed. One of our main objectives is to discuss the process for PO creation, and I mentioned that this could be completed using either a manual or an automated workflow. In order to manually create purchase orders, users would access the process purchase order routine. Within this routine, the buyer would identify the individual items that they're ordering along with the order quantity. Although there will be times when you can avoid having to manually create a PO, allowing the system to generate POs for you whenever possible can be a real time saver. There are a few different ways to accomplish this, and we'll discuss all of them in greater detail once we jump into the system. To briefly summarize, the Create PO from Inventory routine will take current quantities into consideration along with the minimum reorder point, and it will make a determination as to whether a stock item should be reordered. Any stock items that are identified when the routine is launched will automatically be placed onto a PO. Another way to automatically generate POs would be to use the Create PO from Purchase Recs routine. Doing so will tell the system to review verified purchase requisitions, and any associated items will be placed onto Automation can extend even further if the purchase order schedule dictionary is utilized. Here you can specify a date and time for the system to launch the Create PO from Inventory and the Create PO from Purchase Rec routines. And on our last screen here, we're looking at the General tab of the parameters, and specifically we're focusing on the field titled Order Method. The response made here determines when the system should create purchase orders and how the system will calculate the recommended order quantity, or the ROQ. In this example, we've entered MSQ, or maximum shelf quantity, and displayed its associated formula, which is right here. This is the least complicated and most common choice of order methods for live systems. Other options include dynamic order quantity and economic order quantity, which both rely on statistical history to determine the ROQ. So as you can see, we have a lot to go over today, so let's move forward by hopping into the system. From the main menu, we can easily access all of our purchasing routines. And at the top of the main menu, you can see that we have access to several desktops as well. For buyers, we would recommend using the purchasing desktop, as it standardly contains all of the routines that a buyer would typically need. Looking at the right side of the screen, we can see all of the purchasing related routines that we have access to via the standard purchasing desktop. In the event that some users shouldn't have access to all available purchasing routines, custom function sets can be created, allowing you to tailor the desktop to fit the user's needs. So maybe we have a buyer who's responsible for entering POs, but should not be receiving. For them, we could remove the PO receive functionality from the right side of the screen. Let's go ahead and jump into purchase orders. Now here we would also need to adjust the sub-functions for that particular user in regards to the ability to receive in, as the receive functionality exists here as well. In addition to having the ability to restrict a user's access to certain routines within the desktop, both standard and custom menus can be added to this Custom Reports tab. So in this case, you can see that we've given ourselves access to the Dictionary menu. So while we're here, let's take a quick look at the Access Dictionary, and that would be under Security. There are a few fields within the Access Dictionary which relate specifically to purchasing. So let's start with the receiving screen. As you can see, there are 5 options to choose from, which allow our users access to the various screens within the receiving routine to be restricted. Receive Multiple allows you to receive all line items on a PO. Receive Selected allows you to receive in one line at a time. And the restricted versions of both of these routines will prevent quantity information from being seen, causing the user to manually enter those. The standard screen gives users 3 receipt options to choose from. They can receive in all line items on the PO, only selected line items, or only unselected line items. For our directors, we're going to set them up with the Receive Multiple screen. Once we choose our receiving screen, our cursor moves to the capital EOC restriction field. If this field is left blank or set to no, there will not be any restrictions in the EOC prompt for capital POs, and you'll see that a little bit later in the presentation. If the field is set to yes, then all users linked to this access group will be prevented from accessing the EOC field for any lines entered onto a capital type PO. The remaining fields related to purchasing all fall within this bottom section. At the Verify PO and Purchase Rec dollar limit fields, we would enter the dollar amount by which to limit the user's access when verifying POs and purchase recs. In this particular example, we don't have anything defined, but if I were to enter $5,000 for one of the users, they would only be able to verify POs or purchase recs whose dollar amount is equal to or less than $5,000. It's important to note, however, that verified dollar limit settings can also be defined within the Verify Groups dictionary, and those settings will override anything that's been defined here. The Restrict New Items field can be flagged yes or no. When set to yes, users will be prevented from creating a new item to be filed in the item dictionary when using the process PO and process purchase rec routines. Similar to the previous field, the Restrict Cost Updates field would also be set to yes or no. When set to yes, users will be prevented from updating the cost of an item to be filed in the item dictionary when that item's cost is edited in the process PO or process purchase rec routines. Item recs fall more toward the inventory category, so Leslie's going to discuss this field with you tomorrow during the inventory section of this week's classroom training. And the final field that we're going to look at is the Allow JIT field. And again, a yes or no response can be entered here. If yes, users will be allowed to enter a purchase order for a JIT vendor, and those POs can then be transmitted via the JIT automatic PO interface. So now that you've reviewed the Access Dictionary and the role it plays with regards to a user's workflow, let's take some time to talk about how the process purchase order screen is populated. Within our demo ring, we have several purchasing facilities. On this screen, we can see that the Med facility has defaulted in for us. And this is a result of user-specific selection criteria that's been defined within the Preferences Dictionary. Preferences settings are simply defaults. So for any reason users need to pull something onto the process PO's work list that doesn't meet the default criteria, the select routine can be used. When I launch the routine, settings in the top half of the screen will default in. But again, they can be edited in order to access POs that fall outside of the default criteria. So if I change this previous to new, I could change select a new purchasing facility. I could define PO numbers, a specific range, or a single PO number, and again, the order date. I could also restrict it by buyer or status. At the bottom, we can identify additional criteria, such as a specific vendor, department, item number, or catalog numbers. The final routine that can be used to pull a PO onto your work list is the Add PO footer button. So if you need to work with a specific PO and you know the purchasing facility and PO number, you can quickly pull that PO onto your work list without having to use the select routine. And now PO 1479 has quickly been added to my work list. So we've talked about the various ways to populate this process purchase orders work list. But what exactly are we looking at here? In the center, you can see that we have our purchase orders, and we can see several pieces of general information for them, such as the vendor and the current status. For the highlighted PO, additional details will populate on the bottom half of the screen. We also have access to several footer buttons that allow us to process our POs. Today, we're going to take a look at each of these routines in more detail, but today we'll start off with Create New, which allows us to manually create new POs. Upon entry to the routine, we're brought to the General Information tab. Depending on the PO type, different fields on this screen will need to be completed. So as we create each of the different PO types, I'll address the applicable fields. At the PO field, we'll enter our PO number. Now, it's important to note that only new PO numbers can be entered here. If general information for an existing PO needs to be edited, the General Data Footer button would need to be used. In order to pull in the next available PO number from the number wheel, we'll enter N for next. Notice that the AP database has defaulted in for us, and this was pulled from the Purchasing Facility Dictionary. The entry here identifies the AP database for which invoices will be created for the PO, and it can be edited if needed. So my PO type, as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 types to choose from. For this first example, we're going to create an inventory type PO. So because I selected inventory type, the inventory field becomes available, and now I need to define my inventory. So while we're required to make an entry in this particular scenario for the inventory, the field will be inaccessible for any other PO type and therefore would be unrequired. Once an inventory has been selected, PO line items will be restricted to only those stock items that have already been defined for the inventory. Also, as mentioned during the slide presentation, there are 3 order types to choose from. In this case, we're creating the PO for a one-time purchase, so I'll choose regular. The date that our item should be delivered to the hospital is our delivery or return date. So I'll make an entry of T+3, or 3 days from today's date. The order and confirm date will default to the current date, but these can be edited. For both fields, you can enter past or future dates. However, the order date cannot fall within a period that's already been closed, and it also must precede the delivery date. The confirm date is the date that we expect orders and prices to be confirmed by the vendor. Next, let's talk about the OK to prepay field. Flagging this to yes gives users the ability to approve invoices before there are receipts for the PO. So in the event that a deposit is due before the receipt of an item, selecting yes here will allow you to process the invoice via the MMAP interface. The buyer will initially default in based on the user who signed into the Meditech system. So as you can see, the MT user is what defaulted. In the event that an inventory type PO is being created, as we currently are, the field will be updated with the default as defined in the inventory dictionary if there is one. And in our case, we do have the MT user defined. Block auto update will default to no, which means that as long as this PO is in a working status, items and stocks for subsequent POs generated automatically by the system can and will be added to this PO. To prevent this from happening, we could enter yes here. So let's go ahead and define our vendor. Now, in our demo ring, we already have an existing working PO for this vendor, as the system is indicating here. So at this point, we could either cancel out of the enter edit PO routine and add our line items to the existing working PO, or we can move forward with creating this new PO. After defining our vendor, data for several of the other fields on this screen defaults in for us, and this information is being pulled from the vendor dictionary. The vendor terms will print on the PO and will be referenced in the MMAP interface when invoices are matched to PO receipts. Free on board will also print on the PO and appears on the invoice screen of the interface. Sales tax will be used to calculate tax for any taxable items on the PO, but this field only comes into play if your hospital has been set up as vendor rate in the MIS parameters. Contact information is defined in the vendor dictionary and will also default in, but can be edited. And if there were any additional details that we wanted to document, we could enter them here as a comment. This can be free text of up to 75 characters in length, or we can look up to the comment dictionary by entering either the pound symbol or a C followed by a backslash and then doing an F9 lookup. I can do that, or I can enter a C backslash. And this brings me to my comment dictionary. And while we can only see the mnemonic from the comment dictionary being displayed right here on the shell of our PO, the text from the dictionary is what will actually print on our documents. And finally, we need to define where we want this comment to print, and we have 3 options: on the PO itself, on the receiving document, or all, which would be both our PO and receiving document. Note that if we are sending POs via EDI, this comment would also be included. Let's jump over to the Other Information tab. The EDI program will default in from the vendor dictionary if this vendor is set up for EDI, but this entry can be overridden if needed. If the PO will be sent by EDI to the vendor, an EDI program must be defined. JIT order will only be accessible if an EDI program has been defined, and the response here will default from the vendor dictionary as well. The global location number is a 13-digit code that is used in conjunction with EDI in order to define the location of the hospital. Depending on the PO type, this number will be pulled from either the inventory dictionary or the purchasing facility dictionary. Ship via is a free text field defining the method of shipment and will print on the PO. Below, you can see that the standing orders and blanket orders fields have been grayed out, and this is because we selected an order type of regular on the general information screen. Later on, we're going to work through the process of creating both standing and blanket POs, so we'll hold off on discussing the importance of these fields until that time. Our offsite or alternate delivery address allows items ordered on the PO to be delivered to an address that is different from the purchasing facility's address. If you're creating an inventory type PO for an inventory that has an offsite address defined in the inventory dictionary, that entry will default into this field, but of course can be edited. And finally, authorization number is grayed out because this is only used for return type POs to indicate approval for the return, but we will see that later on. And lastly, the CDS screen will only be accessible to us if the PO CDS map dictionary has been set up. So at this point, we've completed the process of creating the shell of our PO, so we can save it. And we can see our new PO number here. So we can now go ahead and add line items to the PO by selecting the line splitter button. And I just want to point out quickly, this is the general data tab that I mentioned earlier. If we're making edits to the general information, you wouldn't be able to go into the create new routine because you could only enter in a new PO number here. So this is that general data tab that we would use. All right, so let's go ahead and add lines to our PO. Immediately from this screen, we can see a few general pieces of information about our PO in the header. In the center of the screen, the quick enter edit field has defaulted to no, and this is based on the user setting in the preferences dictionary. When this field is set to no, most of the tabs below will be available to us. If it's set to yes, users will only be able to access the order data tab. So at the item number field, we can begin entering the lines of our PO. Earlier, I mentioned that when entering an inventory type PO, the line items would be restricted to only those items already stocked within the inventory. So I can either enter my item numbers directly if I know them offhand, or I can use the F9 lookup. If I wanted to use the lookup, in order to restrict it appropriately, I can enter S backslash and then do an F9 lookup, and this is going to look just to stocks in this inventory. And then I can select my item. Now, once we enter our item number, we're presented with a few flags. The first is telling us that the item is in stock or on order in at least one inventory, and we're given the opportunity to list the occurrences. So again, this is just telling me that, again, because this is our demo ring, we do have this item on order. We do have it, already stocked in some inventory. So this is just giving me that information. This is the vendor order display. I must have skipped that one. All right, well, it skipped our first flag, but that would have told us if we had items in stock, and it would have told us the specific inventory, where it was in stock, or where it was on order. So then we can make a determination, do we need to move forward with ordering this item, or should we leave it as it is? We then got a flag that the vendor is not the primary vendor for the item, and we're given the opportunity to view the vendor order. And finally, we're asked whether we want to make this vendor the primary. Again, because this is just our demo ring, I don't want to make this the primary or change the order, so I'm just going to enter through these flags. So after entering through these system messages, stock and item information will default onto the screen, which you can see. If a vendor catalog number has been defined within the item dictionary, that entry will default in. And in the case of a miscellaneous item, free text should be entered here. All right, so next let's move down to the order data information. Since we're creating an inventory type PO, the inventory has defaulted in for us from the shell of the PO and cannot be changed. We can also see that the department and EOC fields have been grayed out, and this is because non-stock items cannot be ordered on an inventory type PO. So this brings us to the GL account field. If an inventory line is being created, as it is here, the GL asset account that is defined for the stock in the stock dictionary will default here, but this can be edited if needed. Notice that the packaging string field is view only, and that's because this entry is pulled from the item dictionary. The unit of purchase also defaults from the item dictionary, but again, this can be edited to another unit within the packaging string if needed. If there's any vendor conversion data defined in the item dictionary, that data will appear in the conversion field and can be edited. This data would be entered if a vendor's packaging varied from the standard packaging for the item. So when I jump down to order quantity, notice that a value has defaulted in here. This is because we're creating an inventory line, and the value is system-generated recommended order quantity, which we discussed during the slides. This is, again, calculated based on the order method defined in your MM parameters. If needed, I can override the default, but for purposes of our presentation today, I'm going to leave this set to 2. The cost per unit of purchase has also defaulted in from the item dictionary, and again, this value can be changed if needed. If a change does take place, remember that if the applicable setting has been flagged for the user in the Access dictionary, the new cost can be applied to the item dictionary as well. The confirm field allows us to indicate that the vendor price of $68 per unit has been confirmed. And to the right of that, we can see that the system has calculated the total cost for the 2 boxes that we're ordering on line 1 of our PO. Whenever a change is made to either the cost or quantity of the PO line after it has been verified, a date would be entered here at the change effective date field. On the additional data tab, the manufacturer catalog number, and UPN fields are all view only and defaulted from the item dictionary. The global trade item number is also defined within the item dictionary, and this field is editable. If this PO line was generated from a purchase requisition, then the rec number and line would be displayed below. And these are both view-only fields as well. We can also see a separate section at the bottom of the screen that tells us when quantities for the POs change. Additional descriptions can be added to the PO line by entering free text or by pulling an entry from the comment dictionary, and they will print on the PO. We typically see this section being used for miscellaneous items, as it allows for more specific information about the item to be documented within the system. And the comment transaction can be viewed on the PO inquiry screen, but will not print on the PO. Deliver to locations specify where you want the PO line item to be delivered within the hospital. These could be department specific, depending on how the entry has been set up in the Deliver to Locations dictionary. And next to each location, we're able to enter in a free text comment as well. So let's say I want this to go to my nursing floor 2, and I want 1 box to be delivered there, and then I want 1 box to be delivered to IT. The information entered here will print when the receiving document and receiving report are generated. The bottom section will be filled out if the PO line were being created for an asset, which is usually processed on a capital type PO. So for now, we're going to pass, but we'll review these fields later on. And notice that below we have access to 2 additional footer buttons. View item only becomes available after an item has been added to a line and allows users to view the item's data. Get F5 works like a search and is used to locate specific line items on larger POs. So right now we only have 1 item here, but say I had 30 or 40 lines on the PO, and I just want to have to scroll through and search for it, I could use this get routine in order to jump right to a certain line. At this point, I can either move down to line 2 and begin creating my next PO line, or I can select save to file the line that I've already created. So after filing the line, we're brought back to the process PO's work list, and we can see that our PO is now in a working status. The next step in the purchasing workflow would be to verify the PO, and we'll do that by using the Verify footer button. The effective date of verification defaults in with today's date, but this field can be backdated to any date within an open period. Once I select OK, you can see that I'm being prompted by a confirmation telling me that my PO doesn't meet the vendor's minimum order amount. Now in the bottom left, we can see that Owens & Minor has an $850 PO minimum. And on the right, we can see that our PO total is only $136. This is a soft warning though, and I can select yes to proceed. And again, in our demo ring, we have Verify group set up. So at the bottom of our work list, we can see that the system is listening to an entry called default in the PO Verify group dictionary. And we can see that there are 2 verification levels, which corresponds to what we're seeing on our secondary screen. In this particular scenario, the MT user has been added as an authorized user for both levels, which is why we have the ability to respond yes to both levels on this screen. And because there is an EDI program linked to this vendor, we're being asked whether we want to place the PO on the EDI queue. For purposes of today's presentation, we'll select no. And now that the PO has been verified, the status has changed from working to open. Note that verified POs can still be updated, but the status will remain open. Now, the next step in our purchasing workflow would be to print the PO. So to do this, we will select the print routine. All right, so as you can see, the system gives us 4 options. Print purchase orders allows us to print a hard copy of the PO and can be used for POs in any status, except for canceled. So we're going to run this right now so you can see what that looks like. We have the option to print 0 quantity or canceled lines on the report as well, but for today's purposes, we'll just say no to this. Now keep in mind that the layout of the PO is determined by the format defined within the Purchasing Facility Dictionary. In the top left, we can see our hospital's information and account number. And in the top right, we see our vendor information. Below that, we have our ship to information. And finally, we have our line detail. And at the very bottom, we can see our comments and a signature field. Print purchase order changes can be used in 2 ways. For regular order types, the report will only contain line items whose cost and/or quantity has changed since the PO was verified. For standing and blanket order types, the most recent edition of the PO will be printed. Print receiving document acts as a worksheet for recording the quantity of each line item received on a PO. And finally, the receiving report will provide a list of all line items that have been received on a PO, and the data will be sorted by packing list. This could be used by the receiving inventory or department in order to acknowledge receipt of the items. So the next step in the purchasing workflow would be to receive in our line items. We could use the Receive Footer button, but since receivers likely wouldn't have access to this process purchase order screen as it's geared more towards buyers, we'll process the receipt via the PO Receive routine. Remember that the MT user belongs to an access group that's been linked to the Receive Multiple screen, and this is what you see here. If the purchasing facility is unknown, we can enter P followed by a backslash and the PO number. General information about the PO then defaults into the header region. At the packing list field, you can either enter the actual number on the vendor's packing list, or you can enter N for next, which allows the system to generate the next available number. The receive date will default to today, but again can be backdated to any date within an open period. At the sort order prompt, the system gives us 4 options for sorting the PO lines. We can sort by vendor catalog number, manufacturer catalog number, item, or line number. And once the sort option is chosen, the items will default onto the screen. The vendor's unit of purchase from the PO will default into the units field. Units can be edited if the receipt unit is different than what defaults, but it must be within the item's packaging string. Next, we would enter the quantity received in the unit that has been defined. If the line is back ordered based on the quantity ordered versus the quantity received, the system will indicate this in this column here. We can enter a receipt comment if needed, which would be seen on the receiving report and in the PO inquiry. And finally, entries in the last 3 fields, description, packaging, and allergen hazardous materials, are view only and are taken directly from the item dictionary. You can see that we have access to 2 footer buttons as well. Selecting line information will show additional details about the highlighted line. Enter asset serial number is used to enter data for a capital PO line and would be referenced by the MMFA link. This is the same tab that we saw earlier in the PO line entry screens, just accessible from the receiving screen as well. And by selecting OK, we can file our receipt. As you can see, the system automatically generates the receiving report for us. This version of the report will only display the receipts that have just occurred, rather than giving you the option to print data related to multiple packing lists. All right, so again, as you can see, we have general information about the PO at the top of the report. The information and receiving instructions are in the middle. And finally, information specific to the receipt that just occurred. All right, so let's go back into the process purchase order screen and take another look at our PO now that it's been fully processed. We can see that our PO status is now complete, and all of the fields at the bottom of the screen that were previously empty have now been populated. Let's move forward by creating our next PO, which will be a purchase type PO. Since the process for entering general data for a purchase type PO is no different than the process we just followed for our inventory PO, I'll pull in a shell that I've already created. And we'll go right to our lines. So as with our inventory PO, we're being presented with 3 messages. For right now, I do want to show you this first confirmation since it didn't. There we go. All right, so here you can see the inventory that this item is already stocked in. It says we already have a quantity in hand of 150, and we also have it on order on several PO numbers. Again, this is because this is our demo ring. So again, this information is just available in case I put in the wrong item number or something like that. I could review to see, do I really need to order this item? And the remaining flags we will just enter through. So as with our inventory PO, so the first line that we're creating will be an inventory line. Notice that this time the inventory mnemonic did not default in for me. This is because a purchase type PO does not have any specific inventories associated to it on the shell of the PO. But this also means that multiple inventories can be ordered for on a purchase type PO on separate lines. So we'll go ahead and define our inventory. And once we enter our inventory, the GL asset account that's defined for the stock in the stock dictionary will default into the GL account field, as you saw earlier on our inventory PO. Again, the packaging string defaulted in, and additional stock information can be found at the bottom. All right, so next let's create a second line, and we're going to create a department line for our PO. Now, at the item number prompt, if I want to restrict the lookup to only those items that are already associated to my vendor, I can do so by entering the backslash and the vendor number. Oh, did I put an extra? I might have put an extra 0 in there. I did. All right. So I can then choose from the list of items here. Yeah, a whole lot. So again, we'll just enter through our messages that we've already seen. And this time I'm going to skip past the inventory field and enter department instead. I get a message that the department is associated to other facilities, and in our demo ring, I'm okay with that, so I'll enter through this soft warning and proceed. The EOC defaults in from the item dictionary, and the system combines this with the department code we just defined to create the GL account that the item will be expensed to. And again, the rest of the fields have defaulted in for, so I just need to define my order quantity. Next, I'm going to create a miscellaneous line on our purchase type PO. And I just want to note that this description field cannot be edited. It will let you take this out and type something in, but as soon as you go to the next field, it defaults back to miscellaneous. Additional information to identify this item will instead need to be entered on the Descriptions tab. If we have a vendor catalog number, we can define that here. Note that we don't have access to the inventory field, and this is because miscellaneous items can only be entered on department lines as they cannot be stocked in inventories. So I'll just quickly complete the remaining fields here as you've seen these all before, and then we'll hop over to the additional data tab. And on our additional data tab, again, the manufacturer and catalog number did not default in, as it could be different depending on the item, so we can enter that information here. So let's talk about this descriptions tab. In this particular scenario, I want to take full advantage of the additional description field because it is a miscellaneous item. And this is going to print on the PO as well as on the receiving document. So in these fields, you want to try to put as much information as you can in the additional description just to define the specific item that we are ordering. And this is all we need for our miscellaneous item. So let's jump down to line 4 and create one final line for our PO. As part of that process, I'm going to create a new item. So at the item number field, I can enter N for next for the next available item number. And as you can see, we've been brought to the Enter New Item screen. And again, we're able to do this because of the settings in the Access Dictionary that allow my user to create new items to be filed into the item dictionary. Now these fields can be very helpful because as you can see, the description here is probably not an item that's going to be common to a lot of people. We probably know this as a blood pressure cuff. So we can enter our description and our common name. If needed, we could use the lookup at the allergen hazardous materials prompt if this item falls into one of these categories. The category is a required field for all items, and this is because they're used to help sort reports, and markup percentage information is defined here. So we could do a lookup, or if we know our category, we can just define it. A procedure code can be added if your hospital uses patient issues and sends this data to BAR. The EOC will default into the process purchase orders routine when department lines are generated, as you just saw. So we'll go ahead and enter an EOC for our item. We could override the markup percentage from the category dictionary in this field, and if the item is taxable or implantable, we could note that as well. So next we'll go down to our packaging string and define that for this item. Again, the vendor has already been pulled from the shell of our PO. So we'll jump down to our vendor unit of purchase. And again, conversion packaging only applies if the item already existed and packaging vary between vendors. So we don't need to define this today. And I'll enter my cost per unit of purchase. If we have a vendor catalog number and a manufacturer catalog, we can enter that information as well. A comment will be linked to purchase orders and purchase recs and can either be free text or pulled from the comment dictionary. And below we have access to the Global Trade Identification Number footer button. And here you can enter a separate GTIN for each unit, manufacturer, and cost combination. All right, so let's save our item. And again, we have to file it to the master data because we are creating this new item and we want it to save to our item dictionary. All right. Now in this case, while the inventory field is available to us, we haven't actually stocked this item in an inventory yet, so the only thing we really can do is create a department line. So after saving the PO, we're brought back to the process purchase orders work list, and we can see that the PO is now in a working status. Now that we have a PO with a couple of lines on it, let's take a look at the delete line footer button, which can only be used on POs that are in a working status. Here we can access the lookup to select the line that we want to delete. And then we can save. I can delete another line if I would like to, or I can simply cancel out of the routine. And once we do, we can see that the work list has updated to reflect the change. The lines have dropped from 4 to 3, and our totals have dropped as well. So next we're going to create a capital type PO. Now again, because the general data is all the same, I've already created a shell for this PO, so we're going to move forward with building the lines of our PO. Alright, so let's talk about this EOC field for a moment. You can see that the Meditech user has access to this prompt, and again, this is because there's no capital EOC restriction for the access group that the Meditech user belongs to. However, for capital POs, Meditech recommends leaving this EOC field blank and entering an asset account in the GL account field below. And I'll define my order quantity. Now this is where our deliver to assets tab comes into play. By entering asset tag numbers, users reduce the need for re-entering information about an asset within the fixed assets application. The MMFA link is what makes this possible. If you'd like more information about that functionality, we do have a detailed walkthrough that your MM or FA specialist can provide to you. For today, we'll go ahead and enter the quantity that we want to purchase and the asset tag number that will be referenced by FA. If there's a serial number that should be associated to this item, we can enter that here as well, but that is not required. Now let's say that in addition to ordering the new MRI machine, we want to trade in our existing one. To do this, we can create a second line on our capital PO. Now, after entering our item number a second time, we receive a message letting us know that the item is already on the PO, and we're asked to confirm whether we want to order it anyway. After doing so, we can see that 2 new fields are appearing on the screen. To process the trade-in, we'd first respond yes to this trade-in field. And once we respond yes here, the 4-line number field becomes available, and here we can use the lookup, or we can just enter line 1. So next we're going to enter our order quantity of 1, and then we'll enter the trade-in value as the cost per unit of purchase. And then we'll save. So notice that our PO total is $20,000. Let's go back to the lines for a moment. And notice that the system has taken the cost of line 1, which is $30,000, and subtracted the trade-in value of $10,000 from line 2. So when the invoice from the vendor comes in, which would also reflect the $20,000 total, it will be approved because the PO total and the invoice total will match. Next, let's create a return type PO. Now in this case, rather than entering N for next at the PO number field, Meditech recommends that the PO number be entered with an R in front, dropping the first leading 0 of the original PO number if you know it. Using this numbering scheme helps AP users to more easily identify the return POs, as most vendor credit memos will reference the original PO number. Now again, our PO type will be return. And because I've created a return PO, this return from PO field has become available. So here I want to enter my original PO number. Now you notice that I created my PO number as R1658. This means I'm returning from my original PO number 1658. Now entering this original PO number here is an important step because, as you can see, it took the information from the original PO and transferred it directly to the return PO. I'll keep my order type as regular and enter my return date for T for today. Then I'm going to jump over to the Other Information tab, and recall that we talked about this authorization number briefly earlier. In this last field, I'm going to go ahead and enter an authorization number, as this is going to indicate that the vendor has okayed this return and is okay with returning the item. So then we can save. And next we need to create lines for the item that I'm returning. The easiest way to do this would be to access the lookup in the item number field, because this lookup is going to be restricted to only items that are on the original PO. So then we just need to enter our order quantity, and then we'll jump to the Additional Data tab. And here we're going to focus on the return or exchange field. Returning an item creates a negative receipt when the return PO is closed, and this can then be linked to a credit memo in the MMAP interface. When exchange is selected, the line item on the original PO will have its quantity increased by the quantity of the return. And on descriptions, we want to focus on the return comment field. The entry made here will print on the return PO, so this can be helpful for tracking purposes. And this is free text. So now we can save that. And once all items on the PO have been sent back to the vendor, or when the vendor has issued a credit memo to cover the return goods, the return PO should be closed. To do this, I'll select the Other Functions footer button. And we'll go to the Close Unclose option. Again, effective date defaults in with today's date, but we can edit this if we choose to. And I'm going to accept the default entry of close. And you can see that my PO has now updated to a complete status. So before we move on, I just do want to point out that other functions can be used to unclose a return PO as well. This would be done if a change needed to be made to the PO, and it would place the return PO back into a working status from a complete status. And if the returned goods were for an inventory line, quantity on hand transactions would be reversed as well. Let's talk about the last few remaining footer buttons. The copy lines routine, as you can guess, is used to copy lines from one PO to another. So again, it does have to be a working PO, so it's not going to do anything unless you've highlighted a working PO. In addition to it must being in a working status, the PO type and the order type for both POs must be the same as well. Let's jump back to Other Functions really quick and talk about the other two options that were in here. If my PO was eligible to be placed in a queue for electronic transmission to a vendor, I could select the EDI queue option. And if I wanted to cancel an entire PO, I would use the Cancel PO option. Now, if I only want to cancel individual lines on a PO, then the cancel routine within the Purchasing Routines tab of the desktop would need to be used. Canceling a working PO results in a canceled status. Canceling an open PO will change it to voided, and if the PO is on back order, the status will change to closed. The refresh button will simply populate the screen with the most up-to-date information with any of our POs. And finally, let's talk about inquiry. So we're going to select the purchase PO that we created earlier. The inquiry footer button launches the PO inquiry routine. For troubleshooting purposes, we often refer to this All Transactions tab first. All Transactions records every transaction for a line item on this PO. By using the plus symbol to expand the lines, we can view each of these transactions. Now, because this hasn't actually been received in, we haven't actually done anything with this PO, none of our transactions are coming up here, but this is where you would have like your order transaction, any receipts, any adjustments, any cancellations, and it would come up with the date, the user who created the transaction, the type of the transaction, and the quantities. Just so you can see that, I'm going to select an open PO. So again, because this one has already been verified and it's in an open status, we can now see our order transaction that we created earlier. Now, in addition to being able to access the PO inquiry routine via the process purchase order screen, users can also select PO inquiry from the right-hand side of the screen. And from here, a user can launch the routine for any PO in a purchasing facility to which they have access. So what's nice about this is that if we don't have all the information we need, there are several different lookups that can help. If we have the PO number but not the purchasing facility, we can enter P / and the PO number at the purchasing facility prompt. So as you can see, it pulled in my purchasing facility for me and defaulted in with all the purchase order information. Now, if we have the facility and the vendor number, but we're not sure of the PO number, we can define the facility, enter V / and the vendor number at the purchase order prompt. Doing so will bring up all of the POs for the selected vendor. To see all POs with the department lines for a specified department, we can enter D / and the department code that we want to search for. So these are all of our POs that are linked to Department 01.6000. And finally, if we want to see all POs that include a specific item, we can enter I / and the item number. So those are just some helpful options that you have for using the PO inquiry when you're not sure, you don't have all the information that you need, or if you simply want to restrict it to certain items or departments. All right, so let's go back to purchase order. Here. And so now I can go back to purchase order. All right, and let's start the next section of the presentation by reviewing a standing PO. Standing POs automatically order set quantities of items at regular intervals. These POs can also be auto-received by the midnight run. So I'm just going to use the add PO routine. We're going to go ahead and review one that already exists in the system, as it has been set up exactly as you typically would. Let's look at the general data first. On the general information screen, you'll notice that the order type is standing. New editions of the standing PO are generated automatically by the system based on a combination of the delivery date and also the days in cycle that are entered on the other information screen, which you'll see momentarily. Now, our standing PO here was created back in November and is currently set to receive it again on April 7th of this year. So when we jump over to other information, we're going to focus on these 4 fields within the standing order section. So again, when auto receive is set to yes, the system will automatically receive in the PO lines during the midnight run of the next delivery date, which again we just saw is going to be April 7th. At this point, the order transaction will be created for the next cycle. And again, that order transaction would show up on the All Transactions tab of the PO inquiry that we just reviewed. Days in cycle refers to the number of days that you want the system to add to the current delivery date in order to determine when the next edition of the PO will be issued. So in this case, the next edition will be issued 30 days after our April 7th delivery date. Number of cycles determines the number of editions of this PO that the system will create. So typically you might see 12, you're creating the PO for a year's time. Number of cycles done is system calculated, and this tracks the number of cycles that have been completed. Since our standing PO began back in November, 5 cycles have already completed in November, December, January, February, and March. And this includes March because this would have been received in by the background job back on March 7th. So now let's take a look at the lines of our PO. And the couple of fields that I want to point out are first on the order data tab. Let's take a look at this order quantity. This reflects the quantity of items that you want to receive with the first and any subsequent shipment. So for our standing PO, as you can see, we had it set to do 12 cycles every 30 days. Essentially, we want our PO to be generated once a month for a year's time, and we wanted to order a quantity of 2 for each cycle. Then we're going to jump over to the additional data tab. And the important information here is going to be the quantity per order. The quantity per order is going to be the same as the current order quantity. And this reflects the quantities that will be delivered on future editions of the PO. The total order quantity is system calculated based on the total number of cycles, the quantity per order, and the current order quantity. So again, because we did a quantity of 2 for 12 cycles, the system calculated that this standing PO should in total should order 24 items by the time it is completed. Now notice too that because I said 5 cycles of this have already completed since its November start date, this means that we've already received in 10 because we've received a quantity of 2 for each of the last 5 cycles. Now because the March edition has already been received in, that means the April edition is already on order, so that's why we see another quantity of 2 that's on order for April. In total, that means we have a quantity of 12 that have been ordered. All right, so now let's take a look at a blanket PO. As this is, it is similar, but there are some important differences between the blanket and the PO types. So blanket POs are used to order a predetermined set of line items and quantities that are scheduled to be delivered as needed. Unlike a standing PO, the time between shipments and the quantities ordered can vary. So for this reason, blanket POs are intended to be edited to account for order date and quantity inconsistencies between shipments, while standing POs are intended to be set up and then left to let the system run through each identical cycle on its own. So again, when we saw the standing PO, we saw that we were ordering a quantity of 2 every 30 days for 1 year. The purpose of a blanket PO is that, maybe we are ordering consistently every 30 days, but maybe some months we only need 2, some months we need 5. Or it could be that we might not necessarily order every month. Maybe we're only ordering every 6 to 8 weeks, or, it could be 6 weeks between one shipment and it could be 9 weeks between the next shipment. So that's the purpose of a blanket PO, so that those things can be changed between each cycle. In addition, because of this reason, new editions of a blanket PO must be generated manually by a user. They cannot be set to auto-receive. So the main difference here is you're going to see their order type is blanket. Other than that, all of the information on the general screen would be similar to your regular and your standing POs. Now again, let's jump to the other information tab so we can review this blanket orders section. Now these 3 fields are optional, but we do encourage you to enter them just to maintain consistency with these POs. The expiration date is going to reflect the date on which the agreement expires. So again, I've set this up to expire a year from today. The dollar per order field reflects the maximum dollar limit for each PO edition. and the max dollar limit for all additions combined would be entered at the dollar per PO field. Now note that these limits are only enforced when you're creating a new additions via the blanket orders routine. When you're setting up the first addition within the process POs routine, which is right here, users are only going to receive a soft warning. So what this means is I've set this up to have a maximum dollar per order of $1,500. Now again, because this is a blanket PO and they can vary, maybe I want this to be different for the next time, but the most it could ever be is $1,500. Again, with a very first edition, I could set this up to be $2,000 for my very first edition of the PO, and the system's only going to give me a soft warning. Once I've created that first edition and I go to create subsequent editions, the system will stop me from going past the $1,500 limit. And again, this could be because of the quantity that we're ordering. And again, so this dollar per PO, this is basically saying that, in total for the 12 months that I want this PO to be available to me to create new additions, that this PO cannot exceed a total of $18,000. All right, so let's jump over to our lines. And again, the order quantity is going to reflect the quantity of items that are to be received, in this case with the first shipment. And on additional data, we have our total order quantity that's going to reflect the total quantity that we expect to order from the vendor. Once total receipts for the PO equals the total quantity, the PO status will update to complete. I mentioned that any new additions for the blanket POs will need to be created manually by a user. So to do this, let's jump out of here and access the blanket orders routine, which is found under purchasing routines. So you can see the purchasing facility defaulted in, and then we just need to enter in the PO number for our blanket PO. First, we're going to enter in the date on which we expect the next delivery, followed by the applicable effective date for the new addition. So I'll say I want this delivery 30 days from today. The effective date, again, defaults in with today's date, but we can edit that if we choose. Next, we can use the lookup in order to pull in our line information. The new order quantity is going to default in with the value that was used for the first edition of the PO. But again, because the blanket PO is intended to be edited, I could change that order quantity if I would like. All right, so now that I've created the new addition for our blanket PO, let's hop back to the purchase order screen. I'll find my 1659, my blanket PO, and this time we want to run that print purchase order changes report that I briefly mentioned earlier. So I'm going to accept the default responses as beginning to end. And so this we can see that the information for the new edition that we just created. So the delivery date is going to be April 19th, as that's 30 days from today. Puts in the date that I created the order and the user that created this. So I just wanted to point this out because remember that for standing and blanket orders, only the most recent edition of the PO is going to print. While for regular POs, only lines whose quantity or cost or quantity was edited after the order was verified will appear. Now, while we're talking about standing POs, I did want to briefly talk about this. Editing the cost of an item can be tricky, as these were designed to assume that the cost per cycle would be constant, and only that the quantity or order dates might change. So we often caution users about making an edit to the cost, because cost changes don't just affect the current edition of the PO, it affects the pricing of all previous receipts and any future editions of the PO. So to prevent this, we recommend adding the item as a new line item and canceling any remaining on-order quantity for the original line item if you do need to make any cost changes to lines on your blanket or your standing PO. Now I'm going to briefly pull up the lines again really quick. Because if you are going to use this process of adding a new line item for the new cost and canceling remaining quantities of the initial item, you'd also need to update this total order quantity field on the original line. Now again, that's because the ordered amount or received amount must equal this total order quantity. So if I had originally set this to order 60, it's only done a couple of cycles, we've only ordered 10 so far, the system sees this as inconsistent. So what I would need to go do is go back to this line, cancel the remaining 50 that are on order, and then come back and change this total order quantity to 10 so that this matches up. Now, generally speaking, standing and blanket POs should only be used for 1 year, and the number of PO lines should be limited just so that it's easier to maintain. The status of standing and blanket POs will remain back order until all cycles have been completed and all lines are completely received. At that time, the PO will update to complete. In order to terminate the PO prior to all cycles being complete, you would need to cancel any remaining quantities on order and then adjust the total order quantity that you just saw so that it matches the value appearing in the order field. And again, that's because the system does not see this as complete until the amount ordered matches the total order quantity. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other tabs that are available to us on the right-hand side of the purchasing desktop. Let's start with the check PO number. So let's say you have a PO number, but we're not sure of the purchasing facility. We can put in our PO number, and then it will tell us. We can see that our purchase order 1496 is associated to our med facility. We can see its status, its vendor, any information that we were not sure of about this PO. So let's jump back to purchasing routines. Again, this contains the blanket orders routine that we just ran. Verify and close unclose are the same routines that we saw earlier as footer buttons on the process PO screen, but these ones actually allow you to process multiple POs at once. So if I go into verify, I can put in my facility and put in multiple POs that I want to verify. Cancel can be used for open and back order POs, and this allows you to cancel either an entire PO or selected line items on the PO, either in full or in part. The cost quantity change routine can be used to edit the quantity ordered and the cost per unit of purchase for a line item on POs that are in an open, back order, complete, or closed status. After you enter the cost changes for a line item, you're given the option to permanently update this item information within the item dictionary, again, depending on the access settings that we reviewed earlier. If an item has not been received in yet, it will now be received at the correct price. However, for items received prior to the cost change, one of two things will happen. If the items are still in the receiving inventory, a stock adjustment will automatically be posted. However, if the items have already been transferred or issued out of the receiving inventory, a manual entry will need to be made in GL to account for this cost change, as it now has no way of flowing to GL through the typical workflow. The dollar amount of the entry can be found within the manual adjustment column of the cost change report. Now, this cost quantity change routine is the same routine that's located in the MMAP interface, and that you're going to see on Wednesday if you are with us for the interface section of the presentation. But I did want to just point this out while we're here, as this is another one of the routines that is available that does have multiple points of access within MM. So now let's go over and review a couple of the reports. And first, I want to go to purchasing reports and run that list cost changes report that I was just talking about. So again, this report is going to display all cost changes that were entered after an item was received in. So we can set it for all or specific purchasing facilities. We can put in our cost change date. Just due to data that's available in our system, I'm going to use a specific date range that is going to show me exactly what I want to show you guys. And we can show all items or just patient chargeable items. All right, so on the first page, we can see a breakdown of totals. The second page is going to display the GL account and the period totals. And finally, our last page is going to show a grand total for the report. right, so up until this point, we've been reviewing the process involved for creating POs manually. So let's shift gears a little bit and begin discussing the different ways that we can automate this process. And we're going to start with the Create PO from Inventory routine. And you can see that's available on the right side over here. So this routine is going to take current stock item quantities into consideration along with the minimum reorder point, and it will make a determination as to whether a stock item should be reordered. As you can see, stocks can be ordered for one inventory or for multiple inventories at a time. And for each inventory, we can order stocks for all or selected vendors. Any stocks that are identified when the routine is launched will automatically be placed onto a PO. The system will consolidate orders by placing stocks onto existing working POs for the same vendor, buyer, and PO type. If the PO type of the working PO doesn't match the auto PO type that's been defined in the inventory dictionary, a new PO using the auto PO type will be generated. The recommended order quantity will be calculated differently depending on your order method. And before we go any further with this routine, let's hop into the inventory dictionary real quick so we can go over a few of the fields that are going to come into play. So again, we have this in our custom reports tab. So I'm going to go in here and go into my inventory dictionary. Now in the general tab, you can see that the purchasing facility defined here is what the system will reference when PO lines are created for this inventory. Over on the Purchasing and Management tab, we're first going to take a look at the Sort Order field. Here, users can determine how stock should be placed onto a PO once it's determined that the stock should be ordered. And this is that Auto PO type field I was just mentioning. So this is going to determine the type of PO that will be created for this inventory when the Create PO from Inventory routine is used. And the default buyer defined here will appear as the buyer for any POs that are automatically created. So next, let's jump into the stock dictionary. On the General Data tab, the first field that we want to look at is the Order on PO field. The entry here determines whether the stock will even be taken into consideration at all when the Create PO from Inventory routine is run. Because we have this set to yes, it means the system will loop through this stock when it goes to check to see which stocks need to be ordered. The unit of purchase on POs, on auto POs, will typically be taken from the item dictionary. However, if we have an entry within this stock unit of purchase field, then this field will be used instead. And next, let's take a look at the standing or blanket order item field. If this is set to yes, it means the system is going to ignore stock levels for this particular stock when those auto routines are run. And that's because the system assumes that if this item is included on a standing or blanket PO, you're already accounting for it with those predetermined recurring orders. So the system doesn't necessarily need to look at it when it's running the auto routines. Now let's quickly take a look at the Stock Issues tab. And here we want to focus on the fields located on the Restock section. Notice that the Restock unit has defaulted in, and this defaults in based on the department unit of issue that's listed up here. Now in the Restock section, this is a view-only field, and that's because it's driven by this field. Below that, we would enter in the maximum shelf quantity based on our department unit of issue that we want to be maintained for this stock in the inventory. We would also want to define our minimum reorder point, and if we're going to maintain the stock item at par level, then the same quantity should be entered for the minimum reorder and the maximum shelf quantity. Let's quickly take a look at a few of the inventory reports as well. The stock status report, you can see, can be printed in a wide or a narrow format, and it's going to list the current status of the stocks for the selected inventory. These reports can only be run for one inventory at a time, and it can include all or a range of stock numbers. And when printed, it will sort numerically by stock number. And then we have the purchasing support reports, and these can be printed by unit of issue or unit of purchase. Now, the reason why I wanted to print these out now before we actually run the routine is because these can be used by the purchasing department to determine whether a PO is necessary to replenish an inventory stocks. So typically, you're going to run these before you run that create PO from inventory routine. So again, our create PO from inventory routine can be initiated to order stocks that are below MRP. This process can then be automated by using the purchase order schedule from Inventory Dictionary. So this dictionary is used to create profiles for automated PO creation. These profiles can either be pulled into the create PO from inventory routine, or they can be set up to run at a certain date and time on their own. In the top section, we can see some general information, as well as the day and time fields. Entries here are optional, but if we choose to use them, we would enter the days of the week and the times of day that we want this profile to be run for automatic PO creation. So I can enter in that I want this to be run every Sunday, and if I do a lookup at time, I can choose my information as well. So I'm going to have this run every Sunday at 8 o'clock. At the order date and deliver date for new POs fields, we have entries of T and T+3. So that just means that the order date is going to show us today, and that the delivery date should always be 3 days from the order date. If your hospital is set up as vendor rate, you'll have access to define a default sales tax percentage for any taxable line items on the PO. Now keep in mind that if this field is edited at any point, it's only going to affect new POs. And moving over to the right, we see 4 additional fields. At the PO buyer prompt, we can make a selection of yes or no. If this is set to yes, the system is first going to look at the buyer defined within the inventory dictionary that we just saw. If there is no inventory buyer listed, the system will then look to the default buyer defined for the profile, which is defined right below. If this buyer matches the buyer on a working PO for the same inventory and PO type, then the stocks will be added to the existing working PO, only as long as the block auto update field for that PO is set to no. If this particular field, the PO buyer, is set to no, the system is going to ignore the buyer completely when determining whether the stocks can be added to an existing working PO, meaning it's only going to check that it's the same inventory and the same PO type. If we select yes at the auto verify field, this will cause the system to automatically verify POs that are created via this create PO from inventory routine. However, the setting at the auto verify field within the vendor dictionary would override what we have entered here. So to avoid any issues with that, we can respond yes to the override vendor dictionary field, which will tell the system to refer to the setting defined here in the profile instead. Now the final 2 sections have similar formats. We can include all inventories and vendors, or we can choose to include or exclude only those vendors and inventories that we define on the right. So for purposes of today's presentation, I'm not going to save my changes of having added the date and time, as we do not want this running automatically in our demo ring, but I did just want to show you how that would be set up. So now that we've seen a profile, let's go ahead and use it to run the create PO from inventory routine. So first we'll define our purchasing facility. I'm going to pull in that profile that we just looked at. And once we enter the profile, you can see that the remaining fields have defaulted in for us. I have this set up to include only the main inventory. And to the right of that, we can see details about the last time the process was completed, including the process list number. Our order date has defaulted with today's date, and we can see that the delivery date is 3 days from today. So we'll go ahead and select OK. And we'll want to take note of this process list number. Typically, you might need to give this a few minutes, and Pokemon will have created pretty quickly, and once the process is complete, would run the list POs created from inventory report. And again, we can run this for all or restricted facilities and inventories. And you could include all of the process list numbers, and again, for purposes of today, I'm just going to run the process list that we just created. At primary sort, do an F9 lookup, we can see the options that we have here, and I'm going to sort by stock number. Okay. All right, so in this case, the system did not find any stocks that needed anything ordered, so we do get a message here. Had it ordered any stocks, we would see those item numbers and the quantities that were ordered. It would also tell us the PO number and the PO lines that were created.